Good evening, everyone. It's good to see all of you. Welcome to Census 2020. I had a good friend yesterday to visit us at our church. And yesterday he said, we have reclaimed our 2020. He was talking about vision. I don't know how close he was or how far he was. But 2020 is very, very important as it relates to the census. For those of you who are here, we're glad that you're here. We're thankful for our panel, and they're going to be presented to us in just a few minutes. Just let us say welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank our Reverend Doctor over there for that warm welcome. I'll be your moderator for the evening, and I was chosen to be the moderator for two reasons. One, I'm a member of the NAACP, the Lynchburg chapter, and two, I'm also a member of the League of Women Voters, and I'm happy to be here tonight because I think this information is for all of us. This is going to be an informational and awareness session. We're going to talk about the benefits of the census and the safety of the information that's gathered. And we have our wonderful panelists here. They'll each do a presentation, after which we'll have a question and answer period from the audience. So if you hear something during the presentation and you'd like to do a follow-up, please wait until everybody has spoken, and then we'll open it up to the floor, okay? Everybody still here? Okay, great. All right. So we're going to start with Robert Fowler. He's the Partnership Specialist, Lynchburg Area Office from the U.S. Census Bureau. That's Robert on the far right. Next to him, all of you should recognize him, Mr. John Hughes IV. He's our Assistant City Manager. Next is Ben Copeland, the Deputy Superintendent for Lynchburg City Schools. Then we have Tamara Rosser, who's the Director of Human Services, also with the City of Lynchburg. We then have Christina Garo. She is the CEO of the Community Access Network. And last but certainly not least, Marilyn Martin, who's the Director of the Lynchburg Public Library. And we'll start with Robert.
Welcome. Thank you for everybody for coming out tonight. I think the biggest thing that has come up recently is the safety of participating in the census. This will be the first census you can do online or over the telephone or receive a paper copy the traditional way. All your information is kept safe. The census does not divulge any names or anything to any other federal agency, local agencies. When you fill that card out, that information stays in the census database and is used for census information only. I've talked to some groups and they're concerned that if they go out and there's 4 or 5 college students in a house, the census takers does not go back to the city and say, hey, we went to this address and there's a lot of people living in there. That's not what the census is about. It's about counting people one time in the right place, and it's safe. So I'd be happy to address anything if I can, if you have any questions related to that.
Thank you, Rob. Good evening. Just to piggyback on what Rob said, in terms of the city's involvement and the need to have a complete count, the main message that we're getting out is that that's exactly what we need. We need to count every individual in the locality where they live on or about. The census day is actually April the 1st of 2020. You should be getting some information prior to that. But the biggest thing is just to make sure that all of our residents and citizens in the locality are counted. That includes students that may be here living on campus, people that are incarcerated, people that citizens and residents that are in hospitals, et cetera. Just want to make sure that we do have that complete count. And not only for the census information, which that every 10-year census, a lot of the social science data is derived from the census information, but it equates to actual dollars that come to the locality, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in several realms from the panelists, education and human services definitely receive funding, federal funding, that's based on numbers from the census. And so with the city, we're just trying to stand behind the Census Bureau and support them in any way that we can to make sure that everyone in our locality is counted and counted correctly and counted once.
So I think I remember a catchphrase from a census probably a few years back. It was related to stand up and be counted. It was a push to get everybody to realize the importance of being counted and how that impacts decisions that are made really for the next 10 years. And if you think about it from an education perspective, there are significant programs that are decided on in the Washington level and in the Richmond level, and the funding that's determined to come into those programs is based off of the locality's census counts, the number of school-age children, how the community might be serving those children. So the stand up and be counted phrase is one that's always stuck with me. We get significant funding through some grants that flow down from the federal government in education assistance. And then there are other programs, if you've paid attention to what's recently happened with the U.S. Departments of Education. I think that the administration is putting significant amounts of money into what we call the title grants, which support children in need or children that fall into certain populations. And those additional funds coming into that are based off of numbers that were developed, I think, out of the last census. So this just continues to help the government have a better understanding of what is going on here in Central Virginia and within Lynchburg specifically. So I think it directly ties back to the programs that we need in this city and the education that we want to provide for our children.
Good evening. I'm Tamara Ross of Human Services. And just to dovetail on what Ben was saying, with social services, the city is reimbursed for every activity that takes place within the Department of Social Services, from rent all the way down to the benefits that we provide to our citizens. What the federal government does, it provides for every locality what's considered a base amount of money. That base amount is based upon population, the number of children under the age of 18, the number of citizens who live in poverty. What they do, what the state has done a really good job providing data for localities. And what they've created is a local department profile. And this profile is about 7 pages of data. The vast majority of the data on this profile comes from the census data. It's just compiled and it's put in one very convenient location. And this is the information that drives the money that we get from the federal government, the money that we get from the localities. There's how our programs, our program money, our program dollars, all of that. But equally as important, it also helps us as a local department determine where we need to put our efforts. Now, this particular set of information is not broken down into census tracts, but we can get that information. So if we know there are certain issues going on in certain parts of the city, then the census data will verify that for us, and we can put more efforts into that area. So this information is looking at people in poverty, the percentage of people in poverty, the number of children under the age of 18 that are in poverty, as well as the percentage of people living in poverty. It looks at the overall population rates. It also has employment numbers on here, the number of non-marital births, the number of people in the workforce, teen birth rates, just a wealth of information that comes to each local Department of Social Services. And as I was saying before, the vast majority of this is census information, which again impacts our money. We rely very heavily on federal, state, and local dollars So when you look at the amount of money that flows through any local department of social services, the vast majority of those dollars are federal dollars. The state's kicking in the next highest amount, and then the locality has a match. That match is very important because, again, that match is based on populations, the number of young people you have in the locality, and the number of people living in poverty. So this census information is very important that we get an accurate count because it really does impact our money, which in turn impact the level of services that we can provide to our citizens.
Hi, I'm Christina Delzingaro from the Free Clinic of Central Virginia and Community Access Network. We're two nonprofit organizations that receive no federal money, so the census doesn't help us when it comes to funding. But what the census does is give a voice to every single resident in our community, whether they are employed or not employed, whether they vote or don't vote. You know, quite often we say that the will of people happens in the voting booth, but there are many people who are unable to vote or somehow restricted from voting. The census is one person, one count. Every 10 years, we have the opportunity to make sure that everyone in our community is heard in that way. And it does impact how services are provided, even if it's not dollars that come to a locality, but what those organizations that serve the community, as Tamara said, how we decide to prioritize. The census is really the only source of data that we have that does go down to the block by block level. So I'll give you an example of how we use that at Community Access Network, which is really critical. So we get information from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, from Healthy People 2020, and most of that information is based on the county or the city. So if we look at that information, it looks like Lynchburg is a fairly healthy city that has a poverty rate of about 21%. Okay? But we know that's not the real story, neighborhood by neighborhood. You know, you come up with an average of 50 if you have a 0 and 100. That's 50. But that doesn't really show what's happening in the community. And what we see in the community through this census data is neighborhood by neighborhood. So there's some neighborhoods in our community that have poverty rates of 73% for the African Americans in that community. Some neighborhoods in our community have poverty rates of 38% for the entire community, which is very different than the 21% that it looks like for the whole city. So when you take a look at that data, plus the data around non-English speaking, births out of wedlock, age, employment status, that gives us a really good picture of if we are going to, let's say, build a new health clinic, where in this city should it be built? And we can look at that data and find out exactly the corner that has the highest level of poverty or disease due to stroke or diabetes at that census tract level. That's so important for us. You know, we are going to be working with our patients at the Free Clinic and Community Access Network to make sure that they understand how important this information is and that this is their one opportunity every 10 years to really be counted and have their voice heard. So we'll be working with our community health workers to make sure that everyone understands the different options they have for participating in the census. And as was said earlier, just really understanding that that information is confidential information. So although we have data that is de-identified, so in a census block, I know what percentage of people are non-English speaking. I don't know which households they're in. They take that information out, but at least we know that neighborhood. So understanding that in spite of what we may have heard from time to time, that this information is safe, and that everyone who's in this country, in this city, in this county, who's living here, this is their opportunity to be counted.
Okay, and pulling it all together, what does the library do? What we have been doing so far is trying to attract people who need maybe a in-between gap job to apply to the census to work. It's great money for our area, and so we help them get online if they need to, whatever, to apply. Encouraging people, hey, go get a census job. So we've been doing that for a number of months now. What we will also be doing is staff in both the youth services and adult service department will be training, taking webinars online provided by the American Library Association so that they are informed so they can inform others. And I feel like the library does really those three things. We will be informing people because they ask us questions. Also, the people that come in here, we know so many people, we see them regularly, they pretty much trust that if we say, yes, this is confidential information, don't worry. You know, we try to make people realize what is important, but also don't worry, they're not going to have your business all over, but this is important. This is important so we can provide the free lunch that we do in the summer. Some of these things that are funded really affect us. Library funding is affected. That comes down through the state. Our materials budget is affected by the size of our locale. So we let people know it's important for us, it's important for them. Also, it's important historically. We get a lot of researchers. And if you've ever been to the Jones Memorial Library to do genealogy, census records are one of the biggest things that people use. And so there's all kinds of reasons that people use data, so you want to remind them. Also, we have many homeschool parents. They may have a lot of privacy issue questions and reasons they might not feel comfortable. We try to reassure them, and what we will be telling them in our children's programs is, this is very important. Count all those little ones. We have these great, I love this. It's a baby in the birthing where they have the newborns, and we will be doing handouts like this to give out. We have a program called Baby Garden. Mom may be pregnant and the baby may come before, and there's another little one crawling around. Count all of those children, because at some point they may be in school, they may need other services, certainly health services, many things that people kind of forget about. We can remind them, and we do a lot, of course, with handouts and brochures, and we will be posting information. I think children's will be our biggest focus. We always work with people, helping them in the adult services with computers, but for the children, the census thing, what I have read, and I didn't realize how undercounted children are. So we're really going to be ramping up the youth services department this year, whereas maybe 10 years ago we focused so much on the adults. So that kind of covers what we do, and that the Census Day, April 1st, right? Census Day, we'll be getting questions on the phone and, in person, and it's, yes, go ahead and do it. We're filling out the form, or we growing online. Here's how you can go. And of course, we have computers available for people to use, which helps a lot.
Okay, I want to thank each and every one of you. And now I have a couple of questions, but first I would just like to make a general overall statement. For those of you who work in not-for-profits and small organizations, the information that's collected by the Census Bureau, it does trickle down, because when you go to fill out a grant application, they want to know about the community in which you're serving. Going to the census, you can get that information offline. It doesn't give out individual information. It just tells you about the community. And anyone who's applying for money, you know and you're serving the community, you need to be able to say what your community looks like and what the needs that you've identified for the community and what services you plan to offer that community. So if you have people that you are working with each and every day in some of the small not-for-profits, please explain that to them, because that's a different focus that a lot of times we overlook. It's not that we didn't know it, it's just that we overlook that when we're talking about gathering census information. Now, I just want to ask the panel a couple of questions. They already talked about why it was important, what the benefits were, and some of them have also stated what their organization is doing to assist the census. But what about recruitment efforts? Is anybody specifically going to be involved in recruiting some of the workers that are needed for the completion of the census? Anyone? I know Marilyn had talked about trying to encourage people
Yeah, we don't really
to apply.
recruit, but we do make people aware of the job openings and the,
Okay.
possibilities and how to apply and give them, they can even sit down and apply at the library.
Okay.
That's pretty much what we've been doing. On average, we get about 4,000 people in our building every month. And so we post information in our front lobby. We also post information in our elevators, and I've even had some staff to inquire about working part-time just as a means to get some extra income. Not actively recruiting, but making the information available to people.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
I think that's about the gist of it. What we've been doing is spreading the information, getting the word out, sending the links to several people via email, text message, putting that information out about the jobs. Rob Fowler has mentioned several times that the state and the locality are behind in terms of their recruitment for enumerators. So
Right.
we're trying to have a big push right now in January as we move on. April 1st is not that far away at all. And there's a huge need in the locality for those enumerators. And so forums like this, one person at a time, a few people at a time, getting that information out and spreading it is very beneficial. So with our colleagues, as Tamara said, several of my colleagues within the city have been looking for either part-time jobs or some other type of relation with their family, if not themselves. And so they've gone online or they received the link, and that's the biggest piece, is just getting that information out in terms of helping the census recruit workers.
Right. Rob, it's my understanding that everybody's going to get a postcard. Could you talk a little bit about that process?
Yes, everybody will get an invitation to participate in the census in the mail. It will have a code, and you can either go online, or you can use a telephone, or you can request a paper copy. Hope you'll get that completed by April 1, and if not, you'll receive probably a couple more reminders to get that information to the census. And then if you do not get that information, they will send out people to your door. They will be identifiable, they will have badges, they will have census bags, their car will have markings. They will not ask you any personal information about your bank account, social security number, or anything like that. If they do, close the door and call the police immediately, because that's not what they're there for. They will not ask you any of that personal banking information, social security, anything like that. Kind of touch back on a few things. In 2010, it was estimated there was over 1 million children under the age of 5 that weren't counted. So that's really huge impact on localities. So it's very important. What I do as a partnership specialist is I go out and find partners. The city, John's done a fantastic job with the city's Complete Count Committee. Maryland has really helped us out, opening the libraries up. And we're working with the colleges and universities for recruitment, that type of thing. So that's what we're doing right now to get ready for April 1. So it's really important. The downside, it is required that you participate by federal law, but the bigger picture is it's our community, and that's why we should be participating, because it is funding for a lot of different resources and services that the cities provide.
So let me make sure I have this right. We'll all get a card in the mail. We then have the option of completing it online or by phone, and then returning it by mail. If we don't
I'm sorry.
meet that deadline,
Then you will receive, a field representative will come out and work the locality to get
Okay.
that information from you door to door.
but if you do respond the first time around, the person doesn't necessarily need to come to your door
They will not
at
come to
all.
your door if you've completed the form now.
So everybody understands. Yes.
Question. What about our increased homeless population? How are they targeted?
We have group enumerators, and then there's a 2-day homeless count. So we work with the localities to get that information as well. And that's a big focus. So Julie, do you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to comment on the receiving of the postcard, because there's certain areas of Virginia, especially along the border with West Virginia, that they will not receive a postcard, just because the Census Bureau is not confident that their mailing address matches where they reside. And based on what you guys were talking about that track data, we're trying to count people where they reside. So if you have a PO box and we don't know that that PO box is matched to where you live at a certain place, you fall under a different operation, which is what we call update leave. There's a very large workload of update leave in Virginia, especially along the borders of West Virginia. We've got a lot in Tazewell County and Lee County, and all along that border. And what that happens with that operation, we send someone to hand deliver the questionnaire. So instead of getting a postcard, they will get their questionnaire directly delivered to them, not in a mailbox, but provided either to someone at the house or tied to the door.
Would you like to come up to the podium and tell them who you are?
Can you not hear me?
No, come on.
Oh,
Sorry.
you good? Yeah. All right.
I want to make sure Phil gets it on.
want to make sure that everybody,
All right.
because that was very good information, because there are a lot of people who do live within the city who use PO boxes. So maybe that would be a good time for you to address that as well.
Sure. Would you like me to just reiterate it?
Yes, please.
Sure. So we were talking about how you are invited to respond to the census. The majority of the country is invited via this postcard, this mail out that begins on March 12th, where you're given that postcard with that ID that you have to enter online or on a paper form, or you provide over the phone. But there is certain areas of the country, there's a lot in Virginia, especially along the border of West Virginia, all along that border, where the Census Bureau is not confident that we can deliver a questionnaire to where someone actually lives. And that is the point of what we're doing. We are counting people where they live. And that's what's important for that track data that everyone was talking about. We need to know where people are, because that's what makes the demographic of our communities. And this is typically in rural areas where people receive their mail in post PO boxes. And generally, if that PO box isn't adequately linked to someone's home address, we want to give you the form where you live. So that is an operation that we call update leave, and we're going to be sending enumerators out to these areas, to these addresses that we think people live in, but we'd like to go confirm and hand deliver that questionnaire. Our staff are not mail carriers, so if there's a mailbox or something, they will not be putting it in the mailbox. It is, we'll knock on a door and hand over that questionnaire package. Or if someone's not home, we will affix it to either a doorknob or something that's easy to see and easily identifiable to make sure you get that form. That operation actually happens before April 1st. We want to start in March because we want everyone to have the opportunity to self-respond. So just because you're not getting that postcard, we want to bring that questionnaire package to you so you can self-respond and someone doesn't come to your door. Now, another thing I wanted to mention is that there are quality assurance operations to make sure that the data we're collecting is correct. Typically, if you respond by yourself, either on phone or online or by mail, someone will not come back to your door. However, there is a very small percentage of the country that will be included in a check. So if that's the best way to put it, that someone may get a call or they may have someone come to their house just to confirm that the data that was submitted is correct. This is a very small subset and not a huge, it's not like, a bunch of people in one area are going to be getting it. But I did want to mention that because I didn't want anyone who self-responds and then gets a call back or gets someone to come to their door to think, oh, my information was lost, or, oh, this person's fake or something. They are identified the same way as all of our other enumerators, so with the badge, and they're collecting the same exact information that was responded, but I don't want anyone to think that, oh, they submitted it and then someone comes back and it looks a little wonky. They do explain what they're doing, that it is part of a process of checking to make sure that the data that was collected is correct. But it's very likely no one in this room will be involved in that sample. But I did want to mention that. Sure.
For you or Rob, two types, because we get people who are homeless who come in. A number of them are at the Salvation Army. So if you're staying at the Salvation Army, say, is there a way that they are counted that day?
Sure. So that's part of our group quarters operation. There's many pieces of the group quarters operation because there's many different types of group quarters, but something like the Salvation Army falls under our service-based enumeration operation, which is a 3-day operation where we go out to these known areas like Salvation Army, Red Cross, there's mobile food vans, a lot of different types, and we make sure that we count them there. We're actually just gearing up for our group quarters advanced contact operation, where we contact a lot of these facilities where many people experiencing homeless interface with the public. So to ensure that they're available, that they're going to participate, and that we can set up the time for when we will go and count them.
Well, the other situation would be people who are in temporary housing, say they've been living here, but then they're living somewhere else. So they may not get a card. So what about someone like that?
So
A lot of times it's mom. We run into plenty of issues with moms and the children are one place, the mom another, and whatever, and it's kind of.
So it varies by housing type. For locations or places that are maybe more transient, we do have an operation. It's called enumeration at transitory locations, in long-term stay motels types of places. But each housing unit that we have identified and that we have in our master address file will receive a card, because that card isn't going to it's not coming to me, it's not going to Rob Fowler, it's going to the address. And just because, someone different lived there, let's say a month before or 2 years before, it doesn't matter, because we're trying to count who's in that house as of April 1st, 2020.
So we can, if someone had a question, if you're staying with, say, your cousin because you don't have a place, they would be counted within that location. And that's, I think, a hard thing, and that's where I can see people get missed. Because if somebody's staying who doesn't normally live there, they need to be sure and count them. So I can see that. Those kinds of questions are good to know so that we can answer those.
So the question asks, as of April 1st, 2020, who lives at this address, and you list everyone who lives there. There is a question about, do they live there most of the time? But, if the situation you described is someone that doesn't have a usual home elsewhere, that's where they should be counted. I'm sorry, what's your name? I didn't introduce myself. I'm Julia Galletti. I am the area manager for most of Virginia and West Virginia. So I cover 4 offices, which is the Roanoke Area Census Office, which encompasses the area that we are now, and it's a big chunk of Virginia. And then I have an Area Census Office in Richmond, an Area Census Office in Virginia Beach, and then one in Beckley, West Virginia. So I oversee the field operations, I'm the operations girl, of how we actually collect that data, boots on the ground style.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is an enumerated question. Previously, I've done the census for the last 30 years. And this time, of course, it's all done online or by phone. Will there be a place, or usually we would come here and fill out the hard copy application. Will there be one of those this year, or everyone doesn't have access to the internet?
So it will be mailed out. So initially, we get that postcard out to you, and that postcard invites you to respond online or by phone, because that is the most cost-effective way to do it for the government. If you don't respond, there is a logic to the mail-out, which I don't know off the top of my head, but eventually. Oh, the application for the job. Oh, no, the job application is only online. And that's why we try and work with the local libraries and other centers that have internet access.
Right, and they can come in here and use a computer, and we'll put them right online for it, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and part of our recruiting efforts, our recruiting manager has worked to set up various application assistance sessions because we found many people experience that kind of problem. So we want to encourage as many people to apply. Our recruiting goal within the Roanoke Area Census Office geography, which encompasses this area, is over 17,000. So we're trying really hard to get people to apply.
From the time that they apply to the time that they are given a call, what's the time frame, approximately? Because people have said they haven't heard anything.
Sure. Well, my notes are over there on the chair, but I have a generalization. She was asking me what's the lead time between applying and receiving a call. We've done a lot of recruiting up till now, but we haven't had a lot of operations. We had one operation which ended in October. So this was kind of our downtime where people were experiencing that problem because we're ramping up our recruiting efforts, but we don't have operations going on. Fortunately, now we're heading into our peak operations. We have already begun calls for selecting enumerators for our update leave operation, which is the one I was talking about where we hand deliver the questionnaire, for also supervisors for that area, for the update leave operation. For some of the group quarters work, we've also begun calls for that. And we've also begun calls for our non-response follow-up operation that happens early around areas with colleges and universities. Really soon, we're starting our calls for the enumerators for that non-response follow-up in college areas. However, our big push, where we're hiring the most people, those calls for supervisory positions will start on Valentine's Day. See, I remember that date. And then for the enumerator positions, which is the biggest hiring, that starts sometime in early March. So that's when our staff in the Area Census Office in Roanoke will begin calling our applicants and, begin initiating that onboarding process. So, there are a lot of people that have not gotten those calls yet, but that's because we weren't starting our operations. But now this is the meat of it. This is the time that everything's coming on quickly. So there's already some calls being made, but the biggest chunk of them will be happening in February and very early March.
Does anybody have any questions?
I do. So you're saying there is no office here in Lynchburg? The only office, the census office, the main one is Roanoke?
So we do not have an office here in Lynchburg. Our office that covers this area is in Roanoke, and it covers all the way from Lee County in the west to Halifax. Yes, Halifax in the east, and then it crosses over to the Richmond office, and then it goes all the way up north to Augusta. So it's probably one of our biggest geographies in Virginia that the Roanoke office covers. That's why we have such a big recruiting goal.
So if they contact you within the next year, saying pretty much around early part of February, is based on their needs?
So for Update Leave, which is that operation I was talking about where we deliver that the questionnaire to people's homes, I've already made those calls. But those calls have to be where the Update Leave workload is, which is in those very rural areas and along the border with West Virginia. So, people that applied out of Lynchburg probably aren't going to get a call because there isn't a workload for Update Leave here. However, these two, Valentine's Day and early March, that's for the non-response follow-up operation, which we expect there to be a workload everywhere. It's not something specific like group quarters that, only people that live within a reasonable distance of the Salvation Army or other known group quarters, or the enumeration of transitory locations where we're looking for people that are around these transitory locations. Now, for non-response follow-up, that will be everywhere. That's the door-to-door.
Any more questions? Well, we thank you so much for
Of course.
being here. And I'm sorry that I didn't introduce you, because you could certainly have sat up here and.
Oh, no, it's totally fine. I inserted myself anyway.
No, good.
But I'll
Thank
be here
you.
if anyone has more questions.
Great. Does anybody have any questions of any of the panelists? Yes.
How hack-free is the online process?
How what?
Hack-free.
How safe is it?
Trust the
Oh.
online, not security online.
Bob, you want to take that one?
It's very safe. You're not putting in any of your personal social security information or anything like that as your name, your address, your age. It's very confidential.
I wasn't worried about that. I was wondering if it was, could be skewed by some outside group skewing the numbers, crazy things are happening.
Yeah, I do not think that's going to be a problem.
Okay. People will.
That's true.
Yeah, I can see that question happening quite often. Absolutely. There is a real fear of government getting private and confidential information.
Exactly.
Yes.
As I said previously, I've done it the last 30 years, and I find that's the biggest problem that we find in doing it as an enumerator, are people fearful of giving their information to the government. That was one of our biggest problems. Because I've had people say, get off my porch.
Yep.
I don't tell the government any of my business. You don't move, I'll shoot you. And I was out in the rural area of Douglaston, up in those mountains by myself. But now, the last time I did it, you have to be coupled.
Right.
But, and I'm thankful for the TV commercials, because the more people see it on TV, the more comfortable they will be when we as enumerators approach it.
Exactly. And that's why we try to work with partners, create partnerships with people in community that they trust. If you ever get the chance, you can go on the census website it's ROAM, Rome Maps, and it gives you all the census data, and it gives you the low response score of an area, how many people did not respond. And that tends to be higher in rural areas. There's a location in Appomattox County that's very high. So what I've done this so far is created a partnership with a couple of churches who have a very large base. And they were quite honest and said, it's going to be difficult, but we will try our best. But that's the whole idea of creating partnerships in the community to help people understand it's safe and encourage their citizens and people in their groups to participate and why it's important. So yes, it's always going to be a challenge, certain people.
Bob, are there any other safeguards for people who may be fearful to go door to door? Is there anything that you're doing different than the last time?
I'm not aware of any. You, Julian, anything safety-wise been changed in the past census?
For employees? Or
Yes.
for people giving?
For enumerators?
For the enumerators.
So in areas of concern, we will partner up people, and for certain operations, we will partner up our staff as well. But that's it.
Okay. Yes.
A question for Mr. Copeland. Are there any plans for, or maybe ask it this way, what are the plans for getting to the students in the Lynchburg City schools to encourage their families to respond to the census, and for them to know why it's important?
So one of the things that Mr. Hughes and I were talking about was, once he gets the materials, then we will work through getting those out via, student take-home folders. So elementary students, normally 1 day a week, take home a folder with lots of information. So we'll put flyers in that, send out emails to families, reminding them that this is going on. So we're going to be partners in helping with the communication that the count's happening.
Has the census been included in the curriculum in any of the courses?
I would have to check on that.
Because there has been in some places, in the, classes that teach about statistics, have used the census as an example. You're not aware of that?
I'm not aware right now. I'd have to check and see. I would think that in every government and history class, it's something that's being talked about because it happens every 10 years. So seniors are taking government and history right now while it's their year to graduate. So I think it's probably being talked about some teachers I don't know about across other areas of the curriculum. Good question.
Any other questions? We have plenty of time.
What is the age group for recruitment?
At least 18 on April 1st.
18.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I have 2 questions. Okay, so how long is the census? How long do we do this for?
So we have multiple operations, and the last operation ends July 31st, but there is a little bit of cleanup, for lack of a better word, that bleeds into August. But at the end, we have to be done by August because we have to deliver the count to the executive branch on December 31st, 2020. That's the end of the census officially. But in terms of field work, beginning of August, it should all be completed. Now, operations change. Right now, we're starting our smaller operations, so that update leave operation, and we're beginning our advanced contact for those group quarters to set up our appointments and prepare to go out to these facilities to enumerate their residents. And those operations are smaller and a little bit shorter, but people that we bring on for those operations, we expect to move them into our largest operation, non-response follow-up, which comes in 2 pieces. The first part is our early piece, which is a bit smaller, which will start in, don't know it off the top of my head, but it starts in March to ensure that we capture everyone that lives around college areas before they might go home. And then comes the big operation, which starts in April, when we go to everyone that did not respond. And all those people from those early operations, we expect to move them to the later operations, in the end to that big operation. So if someone comes on board now, our plan is to keep them on until the 31st, especially in an area where we need them. Now, if for some reason they live in an area where everyone magically responded and we don't need them there, we might move them around or move them to other areas to help and travel a little bit. But our plan is, to keep people through the end, but it's in chunks, it's in pieces. So someone might apply right now, which, in an area, and they live in an area where there isn't a workload. So, they're not going to be getting a call till we get to that non-response follow-up.
So are the people that's going to the areas, enumerators, what do you call them?
No.
Are they going with laptops? I heard that you guys had laptops or something this year. And then also, are you saying that, because I did apply, you're going into the house and go over this, or is this information at the door, they give it to you?
The information should be at the door.
Okay.
You should not be
So you don't
walking
have to
in.
go in the house, okay, so you're getting all this information right at the door on a clipboard or on a laptop or something? Or
If devices vary by operation as well.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
So the only time you might be going in somewhere is when you're in a group going to enumerate a nursing home
Right,
or any other group type living facility, then you'll go inside with the contact person that we're establishing now. For the biggest operation, non-response follow-up, where we just go to someone's door, not inside, we will be collecting that information on a phone.
On the phone. So you're talking to a person?
On an app, on the phone.
A phone app.
Oh. And this has to be clarified. Not everybody has a smartphone.
The enumerator.
Some of us have landlines.
Right.
How does that work?
Okay. Two different things. So for self-response, you can do it in any format to connect to the internet. So whether you could be on a laptop, you can be on a desktop, you can be on an iPad, you can be on a phone, you can be at the library computers. That's where you can self-respond. You can self-respond by phone or by mail. For the app on the phone to collect the information, that's for the enumerators that are coming door to door if you did not choose to respond. Now those enumerators are going to be trained on how to use the device with an extensive training package of a bunch of security things, but also just how to operate the device. But it's going to be, if you don't respond, someone's coming to your door, asking you the questions, and entering it on the phone.
Are you supplying the app, phone, are they supplying it, or this is what you're?
It's this one.
Right, you guys are supplying.
We're giving it to you, yes.
Okay.
It's not on your personal phone. That wouldn't be secure. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
We in Lynchburg, we have a number of faith-based groups that have food ministries. Parkview, the Red Truck. In those ministries, we probably see upwards of 250 to 300 families per week. And sometimes, some of those folk are leery. And so they, like as I said already, don't trust everybody. But I believe that if we were able to somehow present the information to those people who come, I think you get an even better response than we've been getting historically.
Mhm.
They come, they bring children, they need the food.
Right.
So they come every week, and there's 5 or 6 locations around the city.
Now Bob talked about creating partnerships, so maybe that would be a partnership that could be created so that someone could come out and meet the staff and some of the other community members and really, have a dialogue one-to-one, And more than one time, I'm saying, you have to really make a commitment, but from my conversations with Bob, and Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong, he's talking about building partnerships where he would be on site or other staff would be on site whenever you would need them to be. Am I right?
As when we build the partnerships, like the Daily Bread, I went in and volunteered that day, and it was just amazing, the work they did. But working with Tracy, the director, we'll be posting flyers. Her and her staff will encourage people to participate. We're trying to reach other partners, so I have a list of those operations that you just talked about to try to create partnerships with them. Because you're right, that's how we get the word, it is safe, you need to participate. That's the biggest thing, is building the right community.
I'd also like to add that Interfaith Outreach Association has been involved in some of the complete count, as well as some other faith-based institutions and organizations. And we've touched on a big word that's a crucial part of this whole complete count, and that's the trust piece for our citizens. There's a number of demographics that are typically undercounted, and I think the Census Bureau is really trying to address those: elderly, children under 5, rural communities, impoverished communities. for a number of reasons, there typically have been undercounted in the census, so we're trying to address that. The only way to reach those groups are by people who attend meetings like this and/or are affiliated with groups, as Reverend Hutchinson said, and when Reverend Hutchinson goes back and has the same conversation, that's how those barriers are taken down. And so with Rob's partnership efforts, as well as things like having a conversation one-on-one, just like a lot of other things that we do, that face-to-face is really important in getting people to have a level of trust with us. Also, there are specific paraphernalia that the Census Bureau has, and our Virginia Complete Count as well, that are geared toward faith-based institutions and organizations. And so there's a lot of information out there that's geared towards specific demographics, and so you can I say that you can go online and look for that, but some of what I've been doing in different meetings is printing out that specific information for the specific group and then passing that along. And so there's an outreach effort from the Census Bureau that's specifically geared toward faith-based. And so I can get that to you, Reverend Hutchinson, and whoever else would need that. I see a hand in the back from, I think,
Well,
Ms.
I
Connell.
was just going to say that some of the rural areas where they don't trust the government and whatever, if they know that it's going to hit their pocketbook, it would, that those monies will come back to their community. I think that's a real important thing for people to know, and I'm not sure they would know that.
I was going to mention that, and Rob can follow up on, but the Secretary of the Commonwealth, we have a call once a month on Complete Count. And one of the numbers that they've mentioned for our locality is that there's about 2,000 per person that's undercounted. So you multiply that per person times 10 years, and then that's about what we may be missing in our locality, somewhere around there. And I think there's some, variation within that number, but you think about what that means, and especially for children under 5, where in 10 years they're going to be in school and maybe receiving other services. So that's a crucial piece.
That's an important thing to stress to your friends and your neighbors. It's about $2,000 every year of funding over 10 years that a locality state would lose. So it's very important to get people counted because it touches a lot of what people use, the services. So it's very important.
See, you and I understand that. There are a lot of people who get assistance, get this, that, and the other. And their fear is, if I give them this information, it's going to cut my check. It's going to stop my things down. Those are the ones that we miss.
Yep.
And that's why I was saying TV and its flyers and whatever, explaining that these dollars are to help us,
Right.
not to harm us.
Absolutely right.
Then once people are aware of that, they're more receptive. But all they see is the government's trying to get my information so they can cut my check, so they can stop my food stamp, or what have you, whatever. Some people just don't trust the government, period. But those are the things that we need to get out there so that, as I said before, by the time the numerators get out there, or by the time they send the cards out, people will be so comfortable and so aware of what the census is and why we do it, that they won't have that fear.
And we're looking, as far as the city's concerned, we're looking to increase the advertising. The idea was to wait until around January because the thought was that if we started that around September, October, by January, people kind of would have had a lot more to think about, which is true now that we're here in January. But in any case, you will see some additional advertising on a number of levels, media, as well as on our city buses, et cetera, that will try to get the word out a little better. Thank you for that.
I just want to say, honestly, and I'm going to go ahead and put it out there, I am 51, and I honestly didn't know what it was for. And I did it every year. I've been taught ever since I was, my mother and them did it. Coming here to the shame to say that I honestly did not know what it was for. So if I'm 51 and educated, know all of this stuff, I can only imagine what other people that realize that don't, like, what is the census for? What are we doing here? So I just have to put it
you tell two people,
Right.
maybe they'll tell
Right.
two people.
Definitely.
And by the time we get to March and April, a
Right.
lot more people will know what this is all about.
Yeah.
And I do have a business card stacked back there. If there's anybody you think I haven't contacted or I should contact to create a partnership with, I would welcome that. Because the more meetings I go to, the more I hear, and I'm like, well, I need to reach out to them too. Didn't even think about that group. But that is the best way to get this done, is word of mouth, through trusted people in the community. I've actually reached out to a funeral home, and everybody's like, why are you going to a funeral home?
No?
Because they're very trusted folks in the community, and if you can get them on board, the idea is like what she's referring to. You get the fear out of people's mind that this is something bad's going to happen to me if I participate. Nothing bad's going to happen to you.
I think the other thing to remember is that when you get this information and you understand it and you're passing it on, as Mr. Copeland says, every time that you share it, you're impacting not only the person that heard you, but who they tell. So hopefully this will be something that we can pass on, because people don't understand that the census impacts all of us. It's not just one little, group of folks that are impacted. It impacts everyone who's living in the city of Lynchburg and every place else outside of Lynchburg. I know there are a couple of people here from other places who had talked about maybe having some partnership arrangements as well. So Bob said that he has some cards, so I'm hoping that those of you who came in will take his card and please give him a phone call and maybe set up a meeting. Does anybody else on the panel have anything that they'd like to share? Any questions that they would like to present maybe to an audience member? Oh, we have someone.
And what do you say to somebody if they say, I'm here, I have a work permit, I'm from Mexico, my family's from Mexico, but we're here on a work permit and we're terrified to give you a lot of information because we think you're going to separate us from our kids and lock us up. What do you say to them that makes them think that isn't going to happen?
Well, there will not be a citizen question on the census this year.
Right, we know that.
And
They
since-
tried, but they didn't
Right.
get there, yeah, we know that.
Census employees take an oath and punishable by a jail and a very big fine if we share any information. That is not what the census is about. Getting counted is about how many people are in a locality. It's not where you're from, why you're here, whether you're here legal or not. That's not the census goal. I think the biggest thing, just repeat that, is, fill it out. Nobody's going to report you to ICE. Nobody's going to turn any of this information over to the federal, any law, state, local law enforcement agency. It's very confidential. You need to participate. Trying to get that through, I think you just have to repeat it.
I mean, do you believe it?
I do believe it. I
really wonder because if I were a person that was here illegally or even with a work permit, I, at this point, would be terrified. I know that my grandchildren were going to a Spanish-speaking school in California, and they were very comfortable there until this stuff started. And then things got so that there wasn't so much friendship between the Spanish-speaking kids and the English-speaking.
Well, I've recently created a partnership with a very large landscaping operation. Yeah, and we discussed that. And when the employees come back, I will be going out and meeting with them to try to stress this to them again. This is not about how are you here, why are you here. This is about getting counted. And in the words of my 11-year-old son, he said the government knows everything about you anyway. So you just, I know it's, in this time, it's really hard to get that through people's minds, but I think if you just repeat it, it'll hopefully work out.
And just do the best that we can do. I think I've had this conversation with several people as well, and there's only so much that you can get people to cross over certain bridges. I think our job is to build that bridge, right? And then we help people navigate this pathway. And some people are just not going to come along for the ride, but some are. We need to get as many as we can And that's with a lot of things that we do in life, and the census is no different. So those barriers, I mean, I will mention that there's a couple of people that are in our community who have been established as leaders of different non-English speaking communities, and I've been in contact with them, and I think Rob has met them too. And that's a definite, inroad to some people that we may not have had on the rolls before. And so I think that's one avenue, is to make sure that we connect with the people who are leaders of certain demographics. But the other piece is we build this bridge and we try to help people across it.
May I ask one more, just a follow-up question? Like with the farm people who work through certain people to get the permits, and I don't know enough about this to use the right language, but they get permits to bring people in from, say, Mexico to work on the apple orchards, on the farms, in the landscaping. Are you working with the people who actually help them get the documentation to come in? Or are you not? Do you know what I'm talking about? There are certain lawyers who work with, say, an apple orchard.
Right.
To get permits for 100 people to come in and work on their apple orchard in this year. Or if this golf course that belongs to the president, that's this year. And they are, if they do it legally, I would think that those people would have a lot of credibility with the farms, but also with the people who got them the documentation.
We have a partnership with Virginia Catholic Charities, who helps refugee settlement, and we've been working with them, especially in the Roanoke region, and I know they're doing it in Hampton Roads area too. So I think to answer your question, yes. I mean, we're trying to create partnerships with everybody. Now, whether there's something higher at the census level, Julia might know that. I don't. Is the census doing anything to work with people who issue permits for people to come into the country and work farming?
I don't think so much people who issue them, but people who work with the farms to get those permits. I think there's a system in place, a legal system that's in place that helps people come in on a legal basis to work for a season. And what I'm saying is I think that the people who get those, who make those legal pieces of paper happen, have a certain amount of credibility in that community, and those would be good people for you to partner with.
Yeah, and I think that's who the Catholic Charity does, the refugee settlement, but we can also follow up and get a confirmation on that.
And if you have an idea of who those, that's what I always say, if you know it, and I have an idea of who specific people are, then get us or get Rob that information, and he'll definitely make contact.
And I think another important piece to remember is that there's so many federal dollars that flow into a locality. It's not just human services money. It's not just education money. It's transportation, infrastructure, water quality, air quality, all those things that impact every citizen. You may not have a kid in school or a grandkid, or you may not ever need my services, but you probably have some concerns about the infrastructure in your locality, the roads, the quality of water. Federal dollars impact all of that, and it's all based on a formula that's going to start with population.
Well, and we haven't touched on the impact of the census on voting rolls.
Right.
And the voting districts, and the number of representatives that we have at the state and federal level. And that's another important
benefit.
part of the census.
It impacts a lot of things outside of just what we talked about today.
Any more questions? Any comments?
I was like Al Reed. I'm in my 50s, and the census has, especially here, been so tied to the voting issue that every other purpose for it has been overlooked and not emphasized. So I think it's important that we let people know the real purpose of the census and how it impacts every single
Everybody is,
person. Everybody.
that's right, everybody's impacted.
I was listening to everyone with different reasons and taxes. It would be nice if we could just get a list of all of those things and spread it out.
There's just like everything else, there's a lot of data out there from the census, and it being the census, sometimes it's hard to navigate, but Tamara, Ms. Rosser touched on a good point that I'll say that there's if you write this down, there's several reports called Counting for Dollars 2020 that's associated with the census, and they have a few reports, and there's a lot of data in those reports. And I was going to mention that in 2015, this was the last review, but the top 5 programs that received money, some of them were human services, but Medicaid, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, which is SNAP, Medicare Part B, and then Highway Planning and Construction, and the Federal Pell Grant programs. Those are the 5 top. So, it's not just all about benefits per se. There's some things that our populations and our residents here take advantage of on a daily basis, especially if you're looking at some people who historically have maybe a bad view about entitlement programs or grants of that nature. They can fall in line with highway planning, construction, and Pell Grants, without a doubt. So that Counting for Dollars 2020, if you look on the census website or you just Google Counting for Dollars 2020, that information is out there of over 132 programs that the census affects. And so that's going to be part of our
and there's a great brochure, one of the ones that we'll be giving out, and it talks about businesses using census data to decide where they're going to build a factory or open a business, which then in turn affects employment. Government uses census, of course, real estate developers, where are they going to build more housing? There are so many things that that it does affect that you can usually use one of them to get a person's interest, especially the ones who are against anyone getting any kind of entitlement funds, even though almost everyone receives entitlement funds. So there are all kinds of hooks for, do it for these reasons.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry, that sheet that you have, ma'am,
We're going to, these are on the census website.
They're all on the website, but she's going to have materials here,
Well,
right?
I was trying to get as many, if the census will give us some of the copies rather than us have to print our own. But we will print copies at the library also for the things that are not available and have them. And that's one of the things, then someone could take it home and read it too.
I do have some information back at the table.
Okay.
But if you're looking for something specific, just email me or email Rob or call me. We'll try to find it and get it to you.
Access to a lot of information we can get you.
There's a lot of information on the back table there, so please, before you leave, visit the table and take some of that information with you. I'd like to call up the president of the League of Women Voters, where is she? Oh, there you are.
Well, it's my pleasure to thank you all. Thank you for coming, for asking questions, for giving your input. And thank this wonderful panel. It's very, very informative. I love what you've all done. And thank our co-sponsor, the NAACP. So, to borrow a phrase from the 2010 census, it's in our hands.
That's right. Safe travel home.